The Appalachian Trail is an incredibly popular 2,200-mile long public hiking trail in the eastern United States that traverses scenic woodland, pastoral, wild and country-resonant lands. Since 1921, it claims to be the longest hiking trail in the world, and more than 3 million people hike segments of the trail each year. The Appalachian Trail has always been deemed as generally safe, with most dangers related to weather conditions, human error, plants, animals or diseases. One other danger on the Appalachian Trail Conservancy list is hostile humans. Since its completion in 1937, there have been 13 known murders on the trail, with the first murder reported in 1974. Today we're going to talk about case number 2, the murder of Janice Balza. Before we get into today's story, World's End posts regularly to tell you some incredible and tragic tales of travelling around the world. If you want to see more, please like and subscribe so you don't miss out. Episode 2 starts with the brutal and seemingly unexplainable murder of Janice Balza. Janice was from Green Bay and had big ambitions of becoming a nurse. She did incredibly well at the University of Wisconsin, earning honours in her academic endeavours and intended to complete a master's degree. Before she did this, she had a scratch that she just had to itch, hike the entire length of the Appalachian Trail. She'd been planning this for 6 years at the time. It was something that was rarely accomplished. As soon as she graduated, she found a hiking companion and set off from the southern end of the trail in early March. Unfortunately, Janice's trip wasn't going to plan. Her hiking companion decided to stop hiking early in the trip, but Janice was determined to finish her hike, even if it meant going alone. Thankfully, Janice met up with an old friend and a boyfriend further down the trail. But in a freak accident, her young friend fell and broke her arm, abruptly ending their trip and leaving Janice alone once again. She made it to the Smoky Mountains by the end of March, staying at a nearby motel and visiting Fontana Village Resort. On April 13th, Janice strode off the mountain into Irwin and cashed in a $20 traveller's check at the Holiday 7-Eleven. When she crossed back into the North Carolina, she stopped at Hughes Grocery and Dry Goods in Elk Park. The Appalachian Trail led over Walnut Mountain and around Watauga Lake, said by many to be one of the most beautiful sections of the route. The path is steep as it rapidly takes the hiker higher and higher into Iron Mountain, where many years ago people made and lost their fortunes mining iron ore. On April the 20th, Janice decided to seek shelter from torrential rain at the peak of the mountain. Luckily, she stumbled across the Van der Venter shelter, where she met a young man and struck up a conversation. This hiker was called Paul Bigley. By the time Janice had started her hike in Georgia, Bigley was well on his way toward finishing the trip he'd started in New Hampshire. The worst of winter's weather was behind him. Several times during the winter, Bigley had left the hike, working long enough to replenish his meagre supplies. In Roanoke, Vancouver, he spent a month working at a rescue mission for $1 a day. As he followed the signs marking the trail's route through downtown Damascus, Vancouver, Bigley spied a man who was attempting to trim a hedge. The man was butchering the job, and so Bigley, working as a tree surgeon at the time, offered his advice. Before the day was done, he had cut 2 trees for the man. Winter caught its second wind, and snow and ice storms forced him to lay over in trail shelters for 3 or 4 days at a time. He often spent nights with his boots pressed close to his body to warm and dry the leather. Bigley celebrated his 51st birthday on April 10, 1975 at the Abington Gap, the first shelter out of Damascus. A group of church members shared a shelter with Bigley, and he met 2 men headed north. On the 19th of April, Bigley hit the Van der Venter shelter 33 miles from Damascus. Bigley said it was raining like hell, so he gathered all the wood he could find into the concrete block shelter and prepared to wait out the storm. On Sunday morning, a Georgia native who had stayed with Bigley at the Van der Venter struck out, trying to make Damascus by nightfall. Bigley decided against moving out in the downpour, and this is where he ran into Janice. The 2 hikers struck up a conversation. Apart from their obvious interest in hiking, they were both students of Eastern religions and talked about Buddhism while sipping cocoa by the fire. They talked about how Janice's friend had broken her arm and that's why she was hiking alone, how she'd become a vegetarian and how her supplies were low and dwindling. As the fire went out, the 2 hikers fell asleep in their own beds, talking the night away. The next day, the 2 hikers woke up and began their morning routines. Bigley was splitting wood with his hatchet and making tinder with his knife so that they could heat the water and cook breakfast. Janice was sitting by the fire, drinking cocoa, and they talked about finding a shoemaker when they next found their town, as a shoe was falling apart. In Bigley's own words, he said, "The next thing I can remember is standing over her with the hatchet, and it was done." Bigley struck Janice multiple times with the hatchet, breaking her skull and cutting her fingers in the struggle. Bigley then dragged Janice's body 50 yards from the shelter to a large oak tree, where he covered her in leaves and branches. Bigley hid some of her hiking gear while some items were taken. He then burned some of her traveller's checks. So who was Paul Bigley, and why did he commit such a random violent attack? Paul Bigley was born in New Jersey in the midst of the Depression. During his childhood, he wasn't a stranger to violence and abuse, and he regularly got in fights. Aged 4, he was pushed down a stairwell, which ended up in him hitting his head and hitting a metal plate in his skull. When he was a child, he was in an argument with his mother, and Mrs. Bigley threw a butcher's knife into her son's eye. After leaving home aged 14, he then became a tree surgeon and later joined the Air Corps and flew supplies around India, Burma and China. Bigley had a number of marriages and showed a history of domestic abuse and violence, which he blamed on blackouts that originated from his time in Burma. One incident was during this 4-month relationship with Viola Manning, who was violently beaten, leaving a stream of blood smeared across the path of their shared house. 6 days after the murder of Janice, Bigley set off for a settlement, and when he approached the timber court with his story of death, the man calmly directed Bigley to a nearby house. At Ethel Whitehead's house, Bigley again told his story, and whilst the woman calmly fixed a pot of coffee, Bigley called the sheriff's department with his story. Bigley was quickly arrested and a large-scale search was organised. Eventually, wave after wave of official searchers began poking around the underbrush after a treacherous hike up Iron Mountain. Suddenly one of the searchers shouted out and the party converged around a pile of leaves and branches alongside a cliff overlooking the village of Butler. There, half covered in leaves, lay the lifeless body of Janice Balza. Hardened officers were appalled by the scene. The young woman's skull was broken open by hatchet blows, her fingers cut as in an attempt to ward off the attack. A blue-handled, bloodied hatchet was found nearby. Searchers discovered articles of Jan's hiking gear stuffed into the crevices of a large boulder. On February the 18th, Paul Wallace Bigley pleaded guilty at the Carter County Criminal Court to a charge of second-degree murder and was sentenced to 20 years in Tennessee State Prison. Bigley insisted he had no recollection of the murder and he doesn't know why Janice was dead. So that is the incredibly sad story of the murder of Janice Balza. Janice must have been a very brave and motivated person who followed her dream of hiking the Appalachian Trail, only to cross paths with a monster. I was only going to do one video on the Appalachian Trail murders, but from the very first case I decided that the stories needed telling in their entirety. This is why I decided to make a series on this. Please feel free to subscribe. I will put all of these videos in a playlist for you to watch in series and binge to your heart's content. If you like this video, please leave a like and a comment. It's completely free and it helps more than you think. Lastly, thank you for watching and I'll see you next time.